and you're not a presenter, if you could mute, that would be enormously helpful. And then we'll be taking written questions at the end, since most of you are in listen-only mode, and there are so many. So you can type in your question, and then we'll triage those at the end of the panel discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Krausman, who's the Senior Director for 211 at United Way Worldwide.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I know there was some hiccups with registering, but I'm glad everyone was able to get online and take the time to join this. I think what you're going to see today is a really wonderful story about the power of the 211 network. I think many of you were aware during and definitely after the hurricane season this past fall of the work that was happening between 211s who were backing each other up, providing information and answering others in their communities, as well as those that were participating on the text platform so we could offer text as a resource throughout the country. This was a really amazing experience and thing to witness this past fall. It really demonstrated the power and generosity of this network. We reached out to 211s who had simply offered and volunteered their time, their staff, their resources to help colleagues in Florida and Texas and Louisiana, and worked with them to come up with a nimble, flexible response. I think this experience really showed how quickly folks in the network are able and willing to learn new technology, to learn new processes, to adapt as situations change, and to be nimble and ready to help each other as well as those in our communities. It also really demonstrated the huge need for the services we provide. All of us know that, but what we were able to show was, look, we provided a service, an option for people to call us and to text us about this disaster, and we were able to talk to all of them, to give them information, to make them feel like they knew what was going on, like they had the answer. And the amount of positive response and sort of 211 lift that provided was really incredible. I think the texting platform and the texting capability during the disaster is a really great example of the direction we need to go in as a network to create that networked structure so that we can back each other up and learn from each other, lean on each other, but also make sure that people in our communities have access to 211 no matter what happens. So I hope that you'll learn a great deal of information from this webinar, what you can do locally in a time of disaster and ahead of time to prepare for one, but also get a flavor for what we can truly do as a network together with 211. So with that, Liesl, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you so much, everyone who's speaking on the panel today, and thank you to everyone who actually participated in some portion of disaster response this past year. We are incredibly grateful to you.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And Jonathan, if we can advance to the map slide, I think you'll get a really good visual for what Rachel was just describing in terms of the response, really covering the entire country, and you'll hear those voices later in the panel discussion. So as Rachel said, the National Text Platform, which is what we'll focus on today, was deployed really initially as a short-term response to Hurricane Irma, which was coming fast on the heels of Hurricane Harvey, just to take you back in time a little bit. And you'll hear from people who played a variety of roles, from responding to text to training their teams to managing resources. And so you'll hear those perspectives as we go through this. So again, the slide gives you a great visualization of the over 70 folks who, for 24/7, were responding to their colleagues in Florida and Texas in particular. Next slide. So you can go forward 2 slides. I wanted to help keep this real. Well, actually, before I help keep this real, if you'd like, we thought we could actually test drive the National Text Platform so you can have that experience today. If you text E211 to 898211, you can send us questions. We're good at multitasking, but I assure you we'll get to those after the webinar. But it will also be a way that we can keep you updated and provide news about the National Text Platform over time. So feel free to engage us that way. It can be lowercase or capital, whatever your preference is. Next slide. So this quote was from somebody in Florida, and I just think it just helps kind of keep things in perspective. She said, "The feeling of support and family between affected areas and the rest of the country was fabulous. I was testing the national texting platform before we started pushing it out through media, and the call agent on the other end closed with, 'Michigan's got your back.' I told them I was the local 211 manager, and I wanted to see for myself how things were going to work. I had been up for almost 24 straight hours and was past exhaustion. Those 4 words meant more to me than any of the well done and pat on the backs after the hurricane passed. I don't know who that agent was, but I'll never forget them." So maybe some of our Michigan friends know who that was and can pass on the thanks. Next slide. So as I mentioned, what started as a response to 2 very strong hurricanes really has become a continual network response to multiple tragedies and disasters that have taken place over this past winter and fall. And you'll hear primarily about the response to Irma, but Kelly in particular will be able to talk about the experience that Ventura County was able to provide to Las Vegas and both Northern and Southern California as they experienced severe wildfires. Next. And for some of you not familiar or maybe familiar with texting, I wanted to just show an example text. This was a very frequent text exchange that happened after the initial response for Irma was set up. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services promoted 898-211 with the text Irma option on their website for about a month to help people locate food packages, which was the way they were distributing food before the Disaster SNAP program was up and running. And so this was what folks were responding to, and you'll hear about the resource website where the staff who were volunteering were able to find where the actual food distribution locations were. So next. So today we'll focus on the keyword Irma, as I mentioned, touch on a couple other experiences. And first up is Libby Donahue, who was on the ground in Florida, literally in the Emergency Operations Center in her community. And so she'll kind of take us back in time to what that experience was like. So Libby.
Thanks, Liesl. Hi, everybody. As Liesl said, I am in Brevard County, Florida. And for those of you who don't know where that is, which I assume is most of you, we are on the east coast of Florida, about halfway between Jacksonville and Miami, about an hour east of Orlando. And our area is also known in Florida as the Space Coast because this Kennedy Space Center is located here. For that reason, our Emergency Operations Center activates more frequently than any of the others in the state because they activate for every launch from either the Space Center or Patrick Air Force Base. And we have an active launch schedule. But despite all of that, we also have one of the oldest emergency operations centers in the state. Jonathan, if you would pull up the next slide. Our agency has worked with emergency management since 2001 when we became a 211, and we have had a contract with them since 2004, 2005, where we take both calls from people who are dialing into their number and they promote 211, and we serve as the citizen information line. I would like to tell you that what you're seeing in front of you is a tiny fraction of the space that they make available for us, but that is in fact a large fraction of the space that they make available for us. On either side of the people that you can see, it's kind of a U shape, and you're looking at the back of the U, there are about 2 more spots for people to work. Jonathan, the next slide, please. That will show you about half of the sort of hub of our Emergency Operations Center. When it is fully activated, there are about 250 people in this space, and our space that you saw is kind of down a hallway behind the panel that you see on the far right of the screen. And one of the downsides to that is that there are no designated sleeping quarters in our EOC. And so the next slide will also show you what it looks like for our staff to try to rest there when they're on lockdown during a storm. This was actually last year during Matthew. So it's not the most luxurious place to be stuck during a storm. So that was our agency's specific experience, the next slide will show you a little bit more about the state of Florida experience. One of the things that we thought was so powerful about the texting platform, and particularly the relationship that we built through the volunteer networks that United Way Worldwide set up, was that we received a few days after Irma passed through a call from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or as we call them, DACS, asking if they could promote 211 as a site to get information about the Disaster Household Food Distribution Program and later the Disaster SNAP Program. We actually were able to work together to get everything operational on our end before DACS was ready to go. They were thrilled to find out that they could also promote 898-211 text Irma as a resource, so not just to call 211, but a text option. There were over 1,400 text exchanges during the promotion, which lasted between September 19th and October 13th. About 406 of those were for hurricane food packages and 305 for the disaster SNAP program. And after September 13th, we also had auto responses for people with information on both programs. I wanted to share a few of the comments from some of the folks, the other 211s around the state, about their experience with that. One of them was in an area where there was not a lot of damage, and they were not one of the designated areas, but they really appreciated seeing how well it worked for their other counterparts. And I think probably between us, don't let them know I said this, we're thrilled that we weren't calling them directly, asking them to step in with all of it, because in Florida, we do that back and forth to help each other out. Another one of my colleagues said that 898-211 is our normal text platform. It allowed us to respond promptly to regular inquiries as well as disaster inquiries. When they lost power, they could use tablets to respond to text, and they are confident that the work that the national program did helped lighten the very heavy load that they were experiencing in Central Florida. Another said that although they were not handling the internal text because the national platform did that for them, they used the platform to blast messages to 5,000 plus phone numbers that they had to bring in traffic and get out information about FEMA, food and ice locations, and how to use the texting platform. So that's kind of a quick overview of how we used it during Irma.
Great, thanks, Libby. I really appreciate that. Well, and next we're going to move to a panel, and these are all folks who played various roles in the response, and many of them can speak to that they thought they were saying yes for a weekend, which obviously later turned into a much more engaged relationship. So each panelist will take about 5 minutes, and then, like I said, we'll have time for questions at the end. So Chiara, you want to jump us off?
Hold on. Yeah, I do. If I can figure out how to get my phone off mute, that would be great. So my name is Chiara. I'm the managing director of 211 in Utah and located at United Way of Salt Lake. We are, just to kind of give some background, we are a statewide system with 2 separate call centers that answer calls. Our typical incoming call volume is around 85,000 a year, and we serve a population of just over 3 million. So that should give you an idea of what our regular capacity is. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll just hit some high points here. So one of the things that when the call went out and said who can help us, or who would be willing to, we immediately felt like we wanted to, for a couple of reasons. One, we were so far away from the area that was impacted, we felt we could do that without really, without putting any jeopardy in our regular calls. We were at a time of year 2 where our calls are typically lower. And so we actually had also been training statewide all of the United Way personnel, whether they were 211 specific or not, on how to respond to disaster calls. So we also saw it as an opportunity to train those people who we had asked to volunteer to become proficient enough to respond to a disaster in our state. So we actually sent out the call to everybody who had already been trained and asked if they were interested. One of the things that we had decided to do is that there were people who had already used the text platform, and there were those who had not, that had been trained in in the process of interacting with individuals. And so we set something up so that we had our operations manager put together a training before so that we could train everybody who wanted to on how to use the text platform. And then we had that central location. Her name's Sandra. She's our operations manager. She's awesome. She was that central location that acted as one question going back and forth. So everybody in our state who was responding would actually give her the questions, and then she would go find the answers instead of creating multiple channels of communication. So we kept that going, kept the training up, and then we actually were able to get everyone ready to go within 1 to 2 hours. And then we responded to it was the thing I didn't like, Liesl. What was it called? Oh, a doodle poll. Okay.
The doodle.
I struggled about that. And so the doodle poll, so that people could say when, and then they got to choose when they responded, and we asked them to use paid volunteer hours to respond to that. So it really actually helped us as we debriefed from our experience here in the state of Utah. It actually really helped us refine our own disaster processes. And there were a few tweaks that we made to what we already wanted to do, and decided that we would love to actually use texting as an option for people who are responding during disaster, because it was actually a lot easier for people who don't routinely interact on the phones, because the anticipation is that you don't have to talk to the person and keep them engaged while you're looking up information. You can kind of do it on your own time, and people are okay with that. So we definitely, it was helpful for us, because we were able to take a better, more critical look at the processes we have in place. We never had the opportunity to really stand up during a disaster, because nothing bad happens in Utah. So, which isn't really true, bad things happen, but we are constantly practicing or preparing and never actually putting it into play. So that's about the summary, and there'll be questions at the end. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Thank you. That was perfect.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up is Jacob from Michigan.
Hi, everybody. This is Jacob. I am the Director of Community Programs at Griffin Place in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We are also a statewide system made up of 8 different centers, and 3 of us were able to respond we provided backup support to Miami 211 during Hurricane Irma. You want to go to the next slide. So yeah, we responded. We got the call for support on Friday about at 4:30. We were on a conference call, and then we started taking calls and text starting Saturday morning at 8 a.m. So it was a really quick turnaround time for us. Probably one of the biggest learning curves though for us was up in Michigan. We don't have hurricanes, so we were having to do a lot of crash course in what hurricane protocols are, and when talking about things like flood zones, evacuation zones. Up in Michigan, we just have snow mostly, so we are lucky to not have to deal with hurricanes. But so it led to a lot of quick learning on our staff's behalf, and again, also just really finding the most up-to-date information, being that we were not local, finding ways to having our staff learn on their toes, and really what it gave us an opportunity to do, since we just do a lot of disaster tests. It allowed us to really test what our protocols were, and develop tools to make sure we're prepared for future responses. As well, in terms of texting, we had just launched text earlier that month, or the previous month, so it gave our staff an opportunity to test the text platform and really become more familiar with it, which was great because our volume was really quite low at that time. So yeah, that is really how we were able to respond. And now it's been nice because we are now part Liesl text me when we're able to respond. Since our staff now has the experience of responding to a disaster, we feel we're much more prepared to respond to not only disasters across the country but local disasters, and are really becoming experts on how to do that and how we can leverage the 2-in-1 text platform as well as the system as a whole. So really, when our debriefing was focused on now how do we develop future tools for response, and that is creating guides for hurricanes, earthquakes, and things like that that possibly our region is not used to, but are very crucial if we're going to respond like this in the system. So that was kind of our role in Hurricane Irma and what we learned, and there will be questions at the end. So that was kind of our perspective.
Thanks, Jacob. And as I think Kelly will hit on earlier, so think about this sort of virtual pool of volunteers who all contributed to a hurricane, and then later in the fall, fast forward, and because I now have Jacob's cell phone number, Jacob was able to rally some support for California, who had some need in kind of November, December around the fire response. So it's really been a very iterative, organic process that's been fun to watch unfold. With that, Melissa.
Thank you, Liesl. My name is Melissa McCoy, and I am the 211 Director for the United Way of Central Iowa. We were called on through the email just like everyone else, and we decided we wanted to assist with the Irma call out so that we could alleviate some of the stress to those call centers during their time of their initial disaster. For us here at United Way of Central Iowa, we had actually just joined the texting platform in March of 2017, and I had 8 full-time people trained to text. Now, prior to Irma, we had not had a lot of practice with our texting because the volume wasn't there. This was able to give our team members the experience that they needed to be able to feel comfortable, jump in head first, and help out. We were able to assist 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week, and we knew that that need would be greater during the mornings and afternoons, and we had the staff available, and they were trained during these periods of time. The platform was easy to use, and it was available anywhere. I was even able to provide additional monitoring and assistance to Liesl as needed at home on the weekends. As you know, 211s tend to collaborate together and help out as needed. We were able to jump in a short amount of time, have everybody up and trained, relieve each other, and help use data markers and support those in our network. We were able to use the 211 website. The Connecticut stood up, and it was very useful. The other thing that was very beneficial for us was that we had to go above and beyond of what we were doing day in and day out. We had to use Google Maps. We had to navigate multiple resources. We had to look for more in-depth information depending on what the respondent's need was. This actually taught my team and myself even more in-depth problem-solving skills. And moving forward, what we've been able to do and share with those in our community is the value of the 211 and the texting platform is we're able to alleviate some of the non-emergency calls to 911. It's easy to use for those in the affected communities because they're able to just text and get a response versus sometimes having to wait on a phone for maybe an hour or, even 20 minutes. A text is so much easier to use than a phone call sometimes in these affected areas. Moving forward, we are looking at opportunities to train volunteers to assist with the texting platform because of the ease of the use, that you can use it anywhere. We were able to share how we helped during Irma with our own emergency management, and this has strengthened our relationship, showing that we can have a rapid response when needed, even if it was to happen within our own community. The network is there, and all we would have to do would be to reach out to Rachel at this point to see if those in our community would be able to help us out in a time of need also. The experience was wonderful, and we appreciate the opportunity to help out as needed.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much. Next up is Kelly Brown. Maybe we can move to the next slide, and Kelly, take it away.
Hi, thanks so much for your time. This is Kelly Brown out in Ventura County, California. And we, in 2017, we really kind of started earlier in this year in February, where we had helped with the Oroville Dam issue. We started a text campaign there, and that was just a week after we launched texting. So it was a good way for us just to figure out how to use the system or to see what might be possible. And then we just kind of started rolling into other issues that were going around the state. with smaller level disasters. Monterey County had some flooding, and Fresno County had some flooding as well. We used texting for both of those. Later on in the year, with the hurricanes coming up, we offered to help, and we took several texts. I have my report here. We actually had about 214 text conversations during the Hurricane Irma campaign, and we were doing texting 24/7 during that time. After the hurricanes concluded, the Nevada shooting happened, so we started taking calls for them and kind of had to ease off on the Harvey calls and the Irma texts that we were doing during that time. So in the first 24 hours of after the shooting in Nevada, we took about 300 calls for 211 Nevada to help their coroner's office to get identifying information from people who were looking for friends and family members during that time. Right after Nevada, we started taking calls for the Bay Area, which we do take calls for. Here in Ventura County, we take calls for 18 counties of California, and many of the Bay Area counties are included in that. And so several of the counties that had fires during the North Bay fires were counties that we cover, and so we were taking calls throughout that entire period. And we were not able to use text during that period as much as we would have liked, just because the event spanned such a very large area, and every single OES and every single city all had their own websites and all their own information sites. Each county, city, OES office, everywhere had a different place that they were putting information. And so what we ended up doing was we had a staff that had to sift through all of those different sites. I think we had about 25 different sites that we were looking through, getting information and trying to put it all in one place. We put it all into what we have here, our national, state and national iCarol database that we have. And that's where we were getting information from. And then we started taking calls for Orange County, California's fire that happened at the same time as the Bay Area fire. And directly after that, we went into what was California's largest fire, which was in our own county, Ventura County. Thankfully, during that time, we were able to use texting. Here in my call center manager was actually out on leave. And on the day that the fire started here in Ventura County, I was in the hospital and I had just had a baby. So there was no call center manager. She was out on leave, and I had just went into labor early, so I was in the hospital as well. So if we had not had ways to take some of that call volume and convert it into text, we would have been in even more trouble than we were. So during the fire here in Ventura County, we started a Thomas Fire text campaign, and on that, we sent that out via social media and at different meetings around the county. As soon as I could be discharged from the hospital, which was the day after the fire started, I started going around doing meetings, talking about what we were doing at 211, and was able to get the information out about our text campaign. And in that text campaign, we were giving information about evacuation areas, evacuation shelters, where you can donate, where you can volunteer, pretty much everything people were asking for, and we were able to update that. As the fire crossed over from Ventura County into Santa Barbara County, we were able to advertise the Thomas Fire text campaign into Santa Barbara County as well, and then split the text campaign to say when you texted in, for Santa Barbara County information, text 1, and for Ventura County information, text 2, so that we could use the same keyword for both sides. And then one time whenever the text campaign was really super helpful was during whenever the fire crossed over into Santa Barbara County OES, they sent out an evacuation notice to the majority of the county, telling them to evacuate, even though the evacuation area was actually just a very small city. So instantly, we had about 500 texts in queue of people looking for more information, because Santa Barbara County's OES office works really closely with 211. So at the end of their evacuation notice, it said, for more information about this, text your zip code to 898211. What ended up happening to us here was that lots of those people had more questions because they were several miles away from the fire and got an evacuation notice on their phone. So they texted in their zip code, which initiates a live two-way text conversation with us here. It was about 3 a.m., so we had 2 agents sitting here with about 500 live texts in queue. So, of course, we got that call at home from some very upset call specialists and text specialists. And what we were able to figure out was we collected all of the phone numbers for everybody that was sitting in queue and devised a message that let them know what was going on, where the evacuation was, and where the shelter was if they were in that evacuation area, and send it out to all of them at once. Then letting them know if you still have questions to text back in. So after we sent it out to them to close all of those out. So the only people that we were having to have two-way text conversations with were people who had questions other than what we had sent out to them, and it alleviated about 99% of that. In total, during our Thomas fire and the resulting mudslide that I'm sure everyone has seen in Santa Barbara County, we had about 10,000 text conversations with about 1,500 individuals between the two counties. And as far as calls, we took about 6,800 calls total during that time period. At this time now, the calls are now up around the 10,000 range now that we're in the recovery period. But the original numbers that we pulled were from December 4th when the fire started up until about January 15th. And then anything after January 15th, we're now counting as recovery. And that's it.
And been a slow fall for you, huh? Thank you, Kelly.
Sure.
So next up is, you've heard different folks talk about a website or gathering resource information, and that was certainly one of the biggest challenges in the immediate weekend of providing response, but then also over time as various disasters took place. So Alana's going to talk about how they constructed a website that people were able to use and some of the pros and cons of that approach and some things to consider for folks into the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Liesl. Hi, everyone. My name's Alana Krober, and I'm with 211 Connecticut. We handled overflow calls from Texas right after Harvey, and then we also did the initial resource management for the texters responding to Irma. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes explaining our approach, some of the challenges we faced, and some of the lessons learned. So it was the Sunday after Irma hit when United Way Worldwide had reached out to us. They had started to put together a large Google Doc of information and resources that would be helpful to those responding to Irma that really needed to be organized and shared with the network of folks responding across the country. So the format that we decided on to collect, organize, and share all of that resource data was a website. And we decided on that approach for a few different reasons. One, it's accessible by anyone with no special access or login credentials needed. It's able to be updated in real time by as many simultaneous contributors as needed. And lastly, it's easy to use. So with little or no training, anyone can search for resources and information. You don't need to know the AERS taxonomy or any other resource insider lingo. And I think this was particularly important given that some of the centers that were handling calls and texts were utilizing admin and other similar staff to help. The website format really only worked for us because we had several important things already in place that allowed us to stand it up pretty quickly. So we use a content management system for our website that's easy to use by anyone and allows for multiple contributors. We also had a library of website templates already ready to go. So we had a template for the structure and look of the site already built, so we didn't need to spend time creating that. And we had a handful of tools and plugins that we were already familiar with that we could quickly deploy to the site. So it was critical that we had those items in place ahead of time, because if we had to spend 2 days alone on just getting the website set up, this approach would not have been nearly as effective. The way that it played out, United Way Worldwide contacted us on a Sunday afternoon about taking on this project, and we were populating content on the live website by noon the next day. And once we got the shell of the website stood up, and you can see that the homepage on the left there, we organized it in a way to clearly delineate between general information and local information. So the homepage of the site had all of the general info and resources like water safety, FEMA programs, CO2 safety, and then there were separate pages for each Florida county where we would list contact information and resources specific to that county. And then later we also ended up adding a map of all the food distribution sites that Libby and Liesl mentioned, and you can see that on the right hand of the slide. So as we sort of began to take this project on, we encountered a number of challenges. Probably first and foremost, even though we have 5 individuals in our resource department, we knew that we were going to need more help. So that Monday morning, the next day, we had a big kickoff meeting. We got buy-in from everybody in the organization, and as a result of that, we were able to borrow 3 staff from another department and got the IT resources we need to get everything in place within a few hours. The other big challenge for us is that we're not that familiar with Florida geography, and we needed to come up to speed very quickly on that. So the map on the left, which is from the Florida Airs, was really a lifesaver for us. So we just took that, we made a huge photocopy of it, put it up in our department, had a large computer projection also going of that map so that we could quickly familiarize ourselves with the geography and figure out where we needed to focus our efforts. We also, had to figure out pretty quickly how to streamline and avoid duplication of efforts because there was so much research and content creation needed and not a lot of manpower. So we defined specific roles early on. So we had those untrained resource staff that we borrowed. They were each assigned a group of designated Florida counties and were responsible for researching and completing a template of information for each county. Then we had other key staff reviewing that research and populating the website, and other staff who were working just on researching and writing the general information sections of the site. And then probably, most importantly, we all worked together in this internal mini EOC space that we had recently created so that we could keep each other up to date and avoid any duplication of effort. Another big challenge for us in the early days after Irma was that we weren't able to obtain or verify information via normal channels. So in those first few days, many 211s, municipalities, and nonprofits were not answering their phones or updating their websites, and so we ended up relying heavily on Twitter in those first few days to obtain information, specifically local resource information, and we also used Facebook Messenger sometimes to verify or clarify information that we weren't sure about, or if we saw contradictory information on different sites and we couldn't get through to folks, we found that we were able to reach somebody usually via Facebook Messenger. And then we also found at least one 211 in Florida that had a general disaster guide on their website, which was really helpful to us in those early days where the websites weren't being updated. At least we found a general guide that had some of that important contact information. And then, lastly, sort of the last challenge was figuring out when we were able to scale back. So figuring out when the local 211s were coming back online and, when we could stop, keeping the local resources up to date and focus more on the general information and the food distribution site map. I think for us, other lessons learned included knowing, when to stop and ask for help. We got activated in Connecticut about a month into Irma for Maria, for folks arriving in Connecticut, and realizing we could stop, we could ask for help, and seeing how when we did ask for help, the amazing 211 network responded, and the fantastic team in Minnesota stepped in to take over maintenance of the website for us. And because we use that easy website content management system, it only took about a half hour to train the Minnesota team and get them up and running. And we also know now that we need to put together our own general disaster guide. and have it up on our website for anyone who is backing us up to have something to access if we aren't in a position of doing real-time resource updates yet. So just, a couple of last reflections as we debriefed here in Connecticut. I don't know whether the approach we took for resource management in this disaster will be the right approach for every scenario like this. There are certainly drawbacks to a website approach compared to using an INR system or software. Most notably, users can't save and track contacts and referrals. But I do know that our 211 is better prepared now for the next disaster. This experience allowed us to take our mini EOC space that you can see in this slide for a test run and instantly saw the benefits of the new design. We got an opportunity to become more practiced and skilled at using social media for research and verification, and figured out helpful ways to put together social media feeds from various sources. And we'll definitely be doing that on our own websites in the next big disaster we have here. And while we had general website templates already built, now we have a specific disaster website that we can easily replicate for any other disaster event. So at the end of the day, although this was a lot of effort, we are so happy we were able to contribute to the collective response. And it was also a great learning experience for us as it was for the other centers.
Great, thank you, Alana. And I think you didn't sleep for about a month there, so the responsiveness of your team was really quite incredible. So our last presenter is Jonathan, who's going to talk about from the technical side, how did this all happen, and what are some takeaways that his team learned going through the experience. So Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Liesl, and thank you, Rachel, and thank you to all of the panelists, and a big thank you to the responders, everybody who participated in the work. It really was a tremendous thing to watch from the perspective of setting up the website and getting the keywords deployed, and then getting all of the staff and the responders ready to respond. It was an interesting perspective, and it gave us insight into not only the power of the channel, but also the power of the network. This 211s are wonderful in these events, and they rise to the occasion. And it takes a certain type of person, and it takes a certain type of agency to do this work, and to rise to the occasion and really establish good, clear communication and ways forward, even in the darkest of times. So what we did here was we just kind of listened to what the needs were, right? We just listened to the fact that everybody knows it's 24/7 news now. CNN tells you way in advance a lot of these things, except for, of course, the LV event. But a lot of these things, and then the fire, of course, caught us all off guard, and I'll tell a little bit about that as well. But with Irma, it was really, everybody kind of saw that, and Harvey, and we kind of were all preparing for that in a way. And so we all vicariously lived through that. And that, a huge credit to those 211s who were there. They didn't know what was going to hit them. And power was out, and probably one of the biggest things that impacts people is when power goes down. And interesting is when power and phones are down, text is a durable channel. It stands up. It's a unique channel in that way. And as a result, texting really has a place in these types of events. I think the network's job and United Way Worldwide's job is to refine those practices, right? To continue to develop methods and strategies that help us utilize that channel, because we all know that it's going to work well. We just need to figure out the best ways to do that. And some of that learning happened during these events. So real-time adjustments, right? So we set up automated messages. We set up, and what I mean by that is the text platform is web-based, and so what we refer to as a queue is the location where everybody logs in and is able to respond. So you have all of these remote responders who are signing up for shifts to jump on the website and respond. And so they get to kind of hear from, in a real way, through text messaging, what's going on from people right there in the impacted zone. And so it sheds new light on how 211s can be part of these events, even when they're thousands of miles away. And it demonstrated to us that assemblage of this, putting the pieces together, can happen very quickly. Now, there's a hybrid form of messaging that came out of this, and particularly in the Ventura fire event. That was an explosive fire that now is historically the worst fire in California history. And what we were able to do is respond in real time by setting up automated messages that go out to anybody who texts in, whether it be to the local 211 or whether it be to the special queue that was set up to respond to people and folks who texted Thomas Fire, and then also in Spanish. And these messages were set up to then go out in a quick series so that they were able to backtrack and address needs, and then also add clients to the queue in order to give them that same information. So imagine kind of offloading some of that heavy phone support to text if you know that these following 5 messages are going to be the most important that everybody needs, and then reminding them that they can always text their zip code for live support. So it's kind of a hybrid SMS model that came out of that work. Now, what can be done now? We believe that establishing partnerships, any kind of use of texting is going to be supported. If you're already on the platform, you know about its capacity, you know that it can be used in additional ways, not just for your INR support, but you can also set up queues for management of these types of events, programs, pushing out messages during tax season. All of that working of the system is going to lend towards a better knowledge of the system. And then if in the event of these disasters, collectively, we're all going to be better operatives of this platform as we grow and expand our uses locally. So we're also very pleased about some integration. We feel that communication is critical, and in enabling agencies to collaborate together is critical. And we're also recognized that integration with other softwares is critical. And for the past couple of years, we've been integrating with the CRMs, and all CRMs have reached, including ReferNet, iCarol, VisionLink, they've all reached kind of level 1 where they're able to push out referrals from their systems to end users. And so, but we also have several points of integration where automated messages can lead to referrals that automatically pull out of the CRM and go to the end user. So we're very excited about ongoing integration models. We also are encouraging of preparation of canned messages and preparing queues in advance. So if one thing that can come of all of this work is a queue or multiple queues that are ready and able to be deployed even more rapidly than what we did before, so that everybody can, 211s can have a role to play in being part of preparation for the next event. And then in spring of 2018, we're going to be releasing an updated user interface that's going to make things, we're deploying at that same time a bunch of new features and functionality so that the system is going to be even more useful in these events. We're improving the staff chat functionality. We're improving the display of the conversations so that concurrent conversations are going to be easier to view and manage, and then staff chatting is going to be easier to utilize so that remote responders can work together in a more efficient way, and then individual responders can work more efficiently with more people concurrently. We're very excited about that coming in spring, and with that, I turn it back to Liesl.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. So I just wanted to flash through a couple big picture lessons learned from the last few months. So just the next slide, and then if we can start to open it up to questions so those can be coming in while I'm wrapping up, that would be great. I think first and foremost, we learned that we need a central place for resource information. What Alana didn't also mention is we actually created pages on that website for Las Vegas information, for fire information as the needs and events change. So having one place that people are familiar with to go to will be key in the future. In addition to things that various people mentioned, local information was changing rapidly and trying to find out the real-time ways to get that. The Twitter feeds, social media were invaluable. And Kelly's document was amazing that she kept up to date because she was tapping into local emergency managers and what their updates were. So some way to continue to do that. Communication methods, this is something certainly the Santa Barbara experience was making sure that you have relationships with local officials and media so you know what they're telling people in the community about 211 so that you're prepared and have an accurate ability to respond as much as possible. Folks talked about this too. This is something anybody can do now. Several folks in Florida created these on that Friday night right before Irma hit. They did a quick overview of their center that they could send to Michigan or to LA for folks who were then taking their calls and texts. Kind of, this is what our community is like. This is how close to the water we are. Some basic overview so that people felt like they could engage with callers and texters in as much local way as possible. And then, as Jacob mentioned, creating generic disaster records. So they're just there. If you've never responded to fire, not sure what it means to have wind or hurricane to get to higher ground, that you've got a record that you could look at and your staff could quickly be oriented to respond to folks in real time. So more to come, but those are just a couple quick lessons learned to share. And with that, we'll open it up to questions, and people can go online and chat, and we'll see if we can respond.
Thank you, Liesl. So you can write in your questions now. We'll go ahead and read off the questions, and then if the panelists, if it's directed towards you, you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and answer that question.
And if there aren't any questions, we can certainly send the presentation to folks as follow-up and contact information for the panelists if you have specific questions. Go ahead. Was there a question, Jonathan?
Okay, so can we have a central location of the disaster guides Michigan has begun to develop as quick guides to train out-of-area assisting to unfamiliar disasters? From Stephanie Walton.
Great question, Stephanie. We're putting together, United Way is putting together a lessons learned document that we'll be sharing with a series of recommendations, and that's a great one to include. I think in the short term, we can work with AIRS to find a spot to put information like
that. Do any local UWs use this disaster response as a way to raise funds?
Kelly, you want to take that one?
Yeah, we are not a United Way 211 here in Ventura County, but we did generate a donation campaign. So if you were to want to try it right now, everybody text to VC211 to 898-211. The keyword is VC211, and it will take you directly to our donation page. So we did launch that. So if everybody wants to try that now and donate $5, please do.
Turning into a fundraising event for Ventura County.
Just to try it out. Yeah, so that worked out really well for us. So it does take you directly to our agency landing page to where you can make a donation directly to 211 for our disaster relief.
Well, and some very wealthy people, were affected by that mudslide. So, we definitely could use the extra support, right? All right. Is there a timeline for having all major 211 software vendors to integrate this into their software? So, what a wonderful question. We are working on a timeline that is more tangible, more specific. The API documentation, or the documents that lay out the integration or points of integration, is available for everybody to download on the FTP. And then what we'll do is we will update United Way Worldwide with periodic updates on the progress of those softwares as we continue to integrate. We feel like, though, integration is never going to be completely done because softwares change, evolve. So the texting platform has an always in development model. So we always have developers working on the software, and integration probably will continue well beyond the initial phase where they adopt the couple points that we've recommended to integrate, because ultimately there's going to be, there will be more ways to integrate, and we want to make sure that we are open to continuous evolvement. They've all reached, all major vendors have reached the first stage, which is being able to push referrals out of their database by text through our system. Do you collect any demographic information in text exchanges? Did you or do you collect any demographic information in text exchanges? And that's from Heather.
In Ventura, we did collect information. We do that during normal text conversations, but during disasters, and especially during disaster surges, there's really not time to collect anything from people other than their location for us. That's what we found.
And this is Liesl. I'll add that one of the challenges that we did find was we wanted to have better data collection for funders and media kind of in real time. So we did use data markers to track what type of referrals we were making. But I think that's one thing that we would want to pay more attention to in setting up in the future. And I don't know, Chiara or others, anybody else want to chime in on that?
Actually, ask that question one more time. I'm not sure I caught it.
Okay.
This is Chiara.
So the question is capturing demographic information during the disasters.
So as a principal, during times of crisis like that, it's more important to get them to, this is also a process and a principle, is that it's more important to get them to the information as quickly as possible. So we gather as basic information we can, like their zip code, so where the request is coming from. And if we're on a call, we'll also gather some things like what language they're speaking and, if they're male or female, and we just kind of guess at that. But in our case, we specifically decided not to because of the critical nature of the information that we were getting out. And the other thing is that we typically use demographic information to help people determine what they're eligible for. And during a disaster, everybody's eligible for everything. So there's not the restrictions that might come with whether you have children or whether there's an age restriction or like a veteran status restriction. So we personally don't, just because of the time it adds to that, but I don't know if anyone has a different answer.
Thanks, Chiara. And I know we've come to our time. It's noon already. What I'd like to suggest is if you have additional questions, again, you can text E211 to 898-211, and we'll capture those questions and respond to you. And we will send the presentation and contact information out to the presenters in case you have more follow-up that you would like to do. But again, thank you so much for your time and interest in this conversation. You are a powerful network, and it was an honor to really be a part of this response. With that, thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and we will be in touch. Signing off.